Hello folks, Halo here with my friend Seek, and we are bringing you our updated party builds for Path of Exile Settlers of Calgar League. Now, this is going to be a pretty fun video. We've changed a lot on the Aurabot. We have decided to completely remove Coruscating Elixir from all versions of the Aurabot. Now, there are arguably points where Coruscating Elixir is better,
All
but
points, really.
yeah,
But
it's a little experimental. We know how many of you hate using the flask. So this PoB set is just coruscating elixir be gone. We're going from life-based straight into chaos inoculation on the Aurabot. It's pretty cool.
yep.
And it's actually not trolling as much as it used to be now. Like it's actually respectable.
Yeah, the
It's good because we don't need the extra reservation to run the fourth damage aura because of the hatred nerfs.
right. Yeah, the opportunity cost of going CI is a lot lower than it used to be relative to going low life. Low life is still absolutely viable. It's often stronger, but the thing about it is it has a lot more moving pieces. It has a lot more annoyances. It has a lot more miniature respecs and like redoing all your gems, that type of thing, every single time. Whereas like right now we just go life based and then we're CI and then your version of CI that's like very similar to what you had before. So as much as low life is still extremely strong, and if you want to use it, especially in like a private league environment when you might not have voices, cluster jewels, or things like that, you can definitely go look back at the old POBs. But we did not have time to separately update that, given that I finished reading the patch notes like 30 hours ago. So
It's been a
yeah,
lot of PoBing. We've kind of lived
going with the
here.
smooth and simple life-based into CI this time around.
So let's give just an overview of what we're going to cover. I've updated the Spark carry and the Stormbrand carry for the new patch, and I have made a carry for Kinetic Blast Deadeye, although there's no leveling tree, and Consecrated Path of Endurance Slayer. Again, no leveling tree. Those two builds are like just new. Probably going to play one of those two in the private league we're playing in. Seek and I will be playing in Eastoria Exiles. It's a private league. It's a really good time. I'll put a link to it in the description. If you have any interest in playing a private league, you should absolutely join us. And then we'll go through the Aurabot, probably do that first, actually. And yeah, we got a lot to go over. It's
Yep, might as
also
well.
2 in the morning
A
and we're
lot to
kind of
go
tired,
over, and
so
yet, yeah. We're just absolutely winging it here, trying to get a modicum of sleep before next league start.
okay.
Okay, so
So
to start, we have well before we get into everything else, I guess we should mention PUB has a new feature at long last. It has loadouts, which means that previously if you wanted to go from like a level 23 tree and then check out, some stuff on early mapping, you'd have to go you've seen this a million times, I'm sure. You'd have to change your skill tree, you'd have to change your gems, and then your item set separately. But now we have loadouts in the top right that will automatically sync everything, so you can
it's
pretty much
so
just swap between
nice.
these.
It's so nice.
Like if we had this would have saved tens of thousands of clicks by now. Even when working on the POV, it's incredibly useful.
Do you want to
So I got
cover?
that now. Yeah.
Do you want to cover the nerfs that the Autobots have received before we go into versions, or you want to just go version
Sure.
by
Yeah.
version?
Let's go over the big changes. So there were two big changes for the Aurabot this league. Probably more. I'm just saying stuff. Number one, hatred no longer grants more cold damage. It's now exclusively physical damage as extra cold, right? Which means it's pretty much relegated to niche uses of like really late game in group play with like a physical spell, or with a very late game high investment physical damage like two-handed setup, such as like if you're playing with someone who's like a 1000 PDPS Fizzbow or a 1000 DPS axe and you're using a melee skill, something like that. That is pretty much the only situation where you're going to be running hatred on an Aurabot now. And so because of that, we just have less incentive to go for a ton of reservation. We don't actually need to go low life the entire time to fit in the massive amount of reservation. And because of that, there's less opportunity cost, as I mentioned before. So we're going CI. Another relatively large change is that and one I'm almost relieved to see, as much as it is a nerf, is that Divine Blessing is gone. It's removed from the game, except for in the
March of the
March of
Legion.
Legion boots, right? So we will be using. Well, anyway, yeah. So that's gone. We'll be using a new Guardian's Blessing setup, which I talk about briefly here in the notes section. I'll mention later. Those are probably the two main changes, I think. And then,
We have
yep,
Defiance Banner being removed, so you don't get the
right.
increased armor and evasion, and then the flat armor and the flat evasion that you had from
Thank you.
Determination and Grace got halved. So some big nerfs, but we've got some big buffs as well. Mainly, we get Dark Marionette Spectres back, so Guardian's Blessing is viable. We'll see
Right.
mentioned that. Hand of Freesia gloves are now core, which is insane. They did fix the generosity bug, but being able to get up to 40% aura effect on a glove slot is ludicrous. Like Jinx Juju, you
Yeah,
run that amulet for 15% aura effect, and these gloves give you 40. Like how it's nuts. So huge
yeah.
power there. Kalandra
These
Jewelry,
gloves alone are almost enough to compensate for the whole sum of the nerfs, and then we've managed to compensate for them elsewhere in the new trees.
uh, Kalandra jewelry are going to be very nice because we have the rings that
Yep.
can get high amounts of energy shield and intelligence, and that's really all you care about in an Aurabot. Um, so they're very cheap. They were in Kalandra League, and they'll be pretty available. We've got base energy shield, like base defense values on armors have increased. So like late game, you'll see a hybrid armor energy shield body armor that'll have a lot more than you had before.
Right, and we go for that a lot earlier as opposed to sitting on Victorios the whole time. Especially with the nerfs to determination, we really need to get a little bit of armor and energy shield off of the body armor to compensate for that.
So the main highlights overall, everything is about the same in power. Things aren't
Yep,
weaker. Spark's fine, Stormbrand's fine, Orabot's fine. Yeah, totally fine.
it's all about the same. You lose a little bit of damage late game on certain versions of the Spark and the Stormbrand carry, and to compensate, we get smoother progression with the Aurabot and just faster gearing overall, fewer respecs,
And just one
and probably better defenses as well.
and one thing to add about losing damage late game is there's so much more damage on the table that you just don't take because why would
Yeah,
you take it? You have hundreds of millions of damage and everything's dead. So it really is everything's good. Nerfs aren't a problem. Everyone's gonna ask if we don't cover it. Um,
yeah,
Oh, they did move dark arts, which is annoying for leveling, so we kind of updated the trees and stuff there. We go right side now.
yeah. We can just get into that, I guess, if you don't have anything else. So, yeah, we start off. It's still going to be rolling magma. It is just a, classic, tried and true. Fire skills are extremely good early game. Rolling magma is very smooth, even if you're not doing like double hits. Just throw it on the enemy. It's an extremely good spell, and it synergizes with all of the meta leveling. So we're going to go because we're going life based, we have a little bit of different pathing outside of the start. We're going to run up here, grab Dark Arts, get this mastery immediately, and then be sure to use an axe and a sword, or like an axe and a scepter, so that you can make use of the 60% increased damage here. And that's going to be giving you a lot more benefit than like anything you could get from wands. And then actually, let me use the loadout menu over here. Go to the left. We're going to be pathing through here, getting a lot of life nodes, and we're going to keep these all the way until we're CI, pretty much. Get fire damage, etc., etc. At this point, you can use Firestorm. No longer are we doing Armacrema. It's like slightly, ever so slightly stronger than Firestorm, but Firestorm requires less respecs, less thinking about your gear. It's a one button skill, and it does almost the same damage regardless. So you can pretty much stick with Firestorm the entire time that you would otherwise do like Armacrema or anything like that. And then, let's see, go to level 50, the Orbot swap. I want to mention that right here, we have deprecated and just completely removed actually the old separate tree for leveling for being an Orbot all the way up to like white maps, yellow maps. If you want to do that, to go to white maps or to go through heist or something like that, what you're going to do is just at this point right here, you're going to grab Heart of Flame, get this other mastery, you're going to go through here and grab Templar Start, etc. Right? And then this, grab Snowforge, and that should give you about as much damage as you need to stay relevant until like level 70 or so, at which point you can swap off.
And since you can respec with gold this league, you're so much more
Right.
flexible leveling.
Yeah, we've been a little bit more aggressive with the respec points, although not a massive amount. Okay. Then go up to level 50. This is where you swap to an Orbot. Just start taking the reservation nodes, etc., etc. We're using Grace Determination. They've been nerfed a little bit, but they are still the bread and butter. You'll be absolutely invincible as long as your res is capped and you've Grace Determ early on in the campaign.
I want to add something on the skills there. You have
Yeah,
Anger as the aura, which is great for attack skills, and if you're playing with the brand skill, like a fire damage carry. If you have a spark carry, swap over to Wrath here. So like
right.
it just depends. You have just when you're playing an Aurabot, you have to know which auras are best for you to carry, specifically the 50% damage auras. So just keep in mind for all of the versions of the Aurabot, adjust your 50% damage auras based on what carry you're running.
All right, level 56, same thing. I don't think we need to touch on too much here. Finish your campaign, you're going to start finishing up your life nodes, get a little bit of armor, and then you can use a Bright Beak to leap slam around, I would recommend at this point, and importantly, reality would recommend every 20 minutes. Early mapping. Okay, so this is where the changes start to come in from last time. We're going to be using, let me think. Wait, what are the changes here? We've just got Broken Crown instead of going. Well, the main change is that previously at this point we used
Ghost Wrath.
Ghost Wraith to go energy shield based really early on. The main benefit of that is that we had been pathing differently and taking a little bit more energy shield, and it also helps your max hit a lot. It can take you up to like 5500 ES right off the bat. The thing about that is the recovery was always uncomfortable with Zealot's Oath, also using a life flask that like didn't apply. Trying to go between that and like a low level vitality, dealing with chaos damage is a little bit rough. So right now you're just going to be life based, get 60% chaos res from this one alch unique right here. Perkle's Toe gives a lot of damage actually. So we're going to be running this later, further than we normally would be. You can allocate Clothing Chain here for everything you'd ever want. One difference I want to talk about is that right here already, from the moment you finish your third lab after Act 10, maybe in white maps, we're no longer going Pathfinder at all. You're going to be going Necromancer. And that means that you're going to need to actually cap your res fully on gear. I do have a Bismuth Flask here. You'll probably want to use one, but like as you go through, we drop that, and you're going to need to focus a little bit more on your gear to actually cap your res yourself. You do have the luxury of like standing by your carry who has Purity of Elements, so you don't need to worry about overcapping. But that is one thing to look out for. We do have little bit of life flask sustain with this cluster down here, and that combined with equipping a vitality once you get to like level 80 or so should be pretty good as far as life sustain goes.
And if you're a spell damage carry at this point in progression, like if you have the Spark Inquisitor or Stormbrand, they'll be running a level 25, level 20 vitality at this point. It gives you a little bit of flexibility
Right.
to adjust
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, the carry usually has enough to pick up the slack on one aura as long as it's not a full 50% here. Okay, we go to mid mapping,
This is where the changes.
and yeah. This is where I lied a little bit. We are using Divine Blessing support. So it was removed from the game generally, but it is still accessible. Any aura you equip that you socket in March of the Legion is going to be supported by Divine Blessing. So we use that with haste. You get the good old Divine Blessing setup. Now, previously, we had to jump through a bunch of hoops to get 100% reduced mana cost, right? Now, because we're life based, we just click Eldritch Battery. This is the reason that it was removed, frankly, is a lot of
Every
meta builds at the top of the tree.
every topside build was just
Yeah.
EB Divine Blessing.
Yep. And so we still make use of that here. Um, that's going to be on haste, and then we have the rest of the auras going around here. This is also the point where you can equip Hand of Frisia, as long as these gloves aren't significantly more expensive than like everything else on the build. You'll want them pretty much as soon as possible. Um, I anticipate them being a very, very common unique. They're extremely common this league. They're not really a chase item for solo players, so they should be dirt cheap as long as they're not a tier 1 drop or anything like that, which they
There's no
have
way.
no reason to be. Yeah. Then you can follow up by equipping like Matua Tapuna and getting a little aura effect on the rest of it. Yeah,
I
I
like
don't
the
know.
energized armor here.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so the energized armor, this is something that would have been expensive to get last league, as it was pretty meta in combination with all the EB, etc. That whole setup. This league, a lot more players are going to be playing on the bottom side of the trees. There's less competition. A lot of the top side builds are going to be mana focused, most of them. So this energized armor pickup here gives you a lot of value over here. You can see if we disable it, we lose about like 40% of our armor. So as long as you're not paying like 20 chaos for this or like 30 chaos, it can be good to pick up to round out your mid mapping setup after you've gotten all the rest of the gear. Uh, you can use the jewels at this point. We no longer have like reservation efficiency on them in this POB or reduced mana cost. So you just use them to fill out like chaos res, or
Get
you
some
can
life
even
if you
use them to
can.
cap your actual res if you need. Yeah, get life. Um, these are our 3 rare slots. You have to make pretty good use of them. When in doubt, you can just sacrifice a little bit of life on them to get
It's
more res.
it's such a meme at this point that Seek puts rings that are like 1.5 stat items is way too ethical. Like, look at this, it's pretty good stuff.
Look,
It's
you don't
it's
want to be
63 life and some fire res and nothing else. You just craft a mod on it. You didn't even craft like a hybrid chaos one that costs a couple chaos to do a tier 1 of. You did the hybrid
yeah,
Ellie.
this is one
So it's like
alch.
even more
This is an
cheap.
alchemy lightning res here. All right.
There's a lot of things on the tree. We anoint what is it, cloth and chain, and then take
Yep.
sentinel just to get more armor and evasion, like make
Thank you.
res a little bit
Yeah.
easier.
Right. Let me see. Anything else? Life Flask. This is basic PoE stuff. It's not really specific to this, but you're going to want to make sure to get this right out of the gate. If you don't know, you can go you can alteration spam to get this prefix or whatever you desire, and then take it to the menagerie. And as long as you've captured a few yellow beasts, you can craft on the bleed immunity to bleeding and corrupted blood, which is especially nice because we no longer path here and get this immunity to corrupted blood from the mastery, so you're going to have to be using your life flask for that.
But it's fairly straightforward.
Yep. And we do have uptime on the on the life flask from the passive tree. So I think we can move on to late mapping. Still going to be on March of the Legion as long as we're life based here. Not much has changed. One thing I wanted to mention real quick on the mid mapping, as far as capping res and just having stuff, Victario's here is the least necessary item. What you can do here if you've got like some good chaos res you don't want to sacrifice down here, or if you just need a little extra room to get res or get a chunk of life, you can just use a rare body armor here. Um, Victario's is here just because it's what you would use if you can afford to, but this is the last item you should worry about, and it's pretty replaceable if need be. So going to late mapping, the setup is almost exactly the same. I really don't think a lot changes here. You might use like 1 or 2 reservation jewels to fill out everything. This is where we use cluster jewels for the first time, one up here that totals 50% reservation, and that's going to allow us to get an additional damage aura, is where we get zealotry, or if you are playing with an attack build, you'd have either wrath or anger, whichever one you weren't using before.
Generally, you just
Uh,
pick whichever helps you
oh,
up maintain Trinity. So because you have
right,
smite,
that's a good
anger
point.
usually like anger plus smite lets you just maintain
Hmm.
Trinity on any elemental attack carry pretty much.
Thank you. Yeah, I forget about that sometimes. If you're running wrath and smite, it can be harder to do Trinity. So anger typically better early, even though it's like 2% less damage or something. Um, yeah, I
Pretty
believe that's
straightforward.
about
We
it.
we take Purkle's Toe for longer than we used to, just
Yep,
because we get so much aura effect from Hand of Freesia that
right.
the
Matu
damage.
Tapuna.
Yep.
Like at this point, you've got like 50% more aura effect than we would have had in a previous patch with this build. And also, if you're not getting benefit from like the int on on Jinx Juju, you're not getting quite as much value from it, right? So okay, And then as we move to the budget endgame, this is where we've decided to go CI. The main reason for that being, again, that we don't have to worry about getting a third damage aura or anything like that, so there is a real decision to be made. The main benefit of CI here is it's a lot simpler to construct. You don't have to worry about flask uptime and all of those shenanigans. You don't have to worry about having like reservation implicits on your jewels to get exactly the amount of life. You don't have to worry about having like specifically level 7 precision for your life bar, anything like that.
No more coruscating
Uh,
incidents.
no more coruscating incidents. Exactly. Um, all right, so here we are using Redblade Banner actually. And the reason for this is that um, Warcries were changed a bit, and we're going to very much rely, because this is the point where you're running purities, your elemental max hit goes extremely high very quickly, and your fizz max hit can kind of get left in the dust. So we've tried to accommodate for that by using Red Blade Banner. You're going to be using Enduring Cry here to give yourself endurance charges. Be sure to put quality on it, and with that and the Red Blade Banner's 50% Warcry CDR, you have permanent uptime on endurance charges, very good uptime on regeneration. Um, and so that's going to give you and your carry defenses. Whereas otherwise you'd just be running your only other option is Matu Tapuna for a little bit more damage, right? We go back to sticking to Alpha's Howl here. The reservation is a little bit tight, so there's really no option. It also does double duty in allowing you to get level 21 purities. Since we're no longer just sticking everything in a Volcaress, you do actually need to have level 21 gems socketed in something that gives +2, in this case Alpha's Howl, to get the breakpoint for maximum res. We are using 7 passive voices here. They're going to be extremely cheap. A lot more people, they're already just a dirt cheap item, and a lot more people are going to be running Simulacrum.
Which will
Simulacrum drops even more cluster jewels this time around, unique jewels, so yeah, these should be pretty accessible. Um, these small jewels here, you just get a little bit of intelligence as you can, and if you need, you can get a little bit of 25% increased effect. That's like going to free up another 3% reservation.
one
We
thing
also use, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing to add on the cluster jewels, because this is something
Yeah,
that everybody misses. Every single person who says I'm dying as an Aurabot, what's going wrong is they don't get intelligence and energy shield on these clusters. Expect to spend about 20 chaos. You can reforge defense. You can alt spam, alt regal. There's a lot of ways to make these. Don't neglect your cluster jewels because they give you a huge amount of energy shield as well.
right. In
And
particular,
it
the
costs
the
so
flat
little.
ES, yeah, is super important. If you're ever in doubt, just have flat energy shield on the cluster and you can't go wrong. But like, for instance, if you just reservation aside, if you just deactivate these, you can see that we're losing like 800 energy shield just from these three prefixes on the jewels there. And there's, more over here. A little bit of tech with the Red Blade banner is that on top of giving us endurance charges, the Warcry cluster nodes are absolutely absurd. Um, you might think we wouldn't use them because we're just an Aurabot, we don't do damage, but they just provide crazy defensive buffs for some reason. So because our Warcries have infinite power with Red Blade banner, we're able to take Warning Call here on a exerted attacks cluster. This just gives us 100% increased armor with full uptime as long as you press your Warcry relatively often. Without this, you can see we lose like 25% of our max hit. We lose armor, we lose Molten Shell. This is extremely important. Be sure not to forgo this. And then also we get Onslaught for both you and the carry, which can help with consistency. Probably, depending on what you run, you're still going to want a Silver Flask on the carry or some other source of Onslaught, but this is really nice for the Aurabot to keep up and to fill in any gaps that you have in your Onslaught uptime regardless. Um, let's see, down here, this jewel is just a Light of Meaning. I expect it to be pretty cheap. You can use evasion, you can use energy shield, or you can use armor. Armor would be the ideal one, I think, but I'm anticipating that one to be pretty expensive, so you can use energy shield here. And then another thing we've changed is that we are using a timeless jewel, right? along with this is actually an after effect, a side effect of the removal of quantity on a lot of items and a little bit of rarity is that the discerning taste notable used to give 40 rarity, now it gives mana reservation efficiency, and that means that when we're so tight on reservation with this CI setup here, you can actually use a timeless jewel to get a little bit of reservation when you would otherwise only be able to path all the way down here, spending like 10 points to get it. Right, so the way you find this timeless jewel is using PoB's tool. Um, you can get a lot of really, really cool timeless jewels up here, but the only thing we're looking for right now is we're going to select minion instability, the slot up here, filter nodes. You can set the node distance to however far you want to travel. For instance, 3 will search for nodes right here and right here, but it wouldn't bother giving you results that have discerning taste reservation stuff popping up all the way up here, right? So you can set that to however far you want to travel to look for better or cheaper options, right? Set that to 3, filter nodes, and then you just go over here, you look up discerning taste, and this is going to output a list of all of these timeless jewels that each have discerning taste on certain notables. I want to mention it's ideal if you can get one that has deep thoughts replaced with discerning taste. Deep thoughts is what would be this mana node right here. Because it is a mana node, even though it's been replaced, it still gives you a mana mastery, right? So if you can get that overlap there, you can save yourself from having to take these points down here. Anyway, we use that to cover up the last bit of reservation. And then mm, anything else?
The body armor. Choice to make it a armor energy
Thank you.
shield
Yeah.
base instead of just.
Right, yeah. We have a ton of increased armor from the Warcry nodes and stuff like that, but we really need a little bit of base armor now that determination was gone. So you're gonna craft something like this. This is just dense plus bound fossils. The armor I've upped it a little bit to simulate the fact that there's gonna be a new base that's better than a Saintly chainmail. So this should compensate roughly for that. This is where you still use bubonic trail here with a unique abyssal socketed. As much as we're not using the life reservation efficiency anymore, we still do need to make use of that generic just to be able to fill in the last auras here.
The good old Kalandra ring.
Good old Kalandra ring. This returned from far in the depths of the item section here,
There's a lot of
and
mods that you can take negative of,
right,
but most builds can't. So it's
yep,
basically only Aurabots are what you're competing against in the
yep.
Kalandra jewelry market.
Really, the only things you have to worry about negatives here are anything that makes you not res capped, things that affect your energy shield, and then you don't want to take minus accuracy or lose a very large amount of reduced mana generation rate. Pretty much everything else is going to be fine, which gives you an edge over like normal builds buying them that have to worry about reduced damage, reduced attack and cast speed, things like that.
And the Ventress Gamble, that's also new league.
Right. Yeah, so Ventors, again, another thing that had its quantity in this case replaced with reservation efficiency. Because you're an Aurabot, you can actually take reduced rarity on the Ventors in 0 life because you're CI, which means that you only need to look for a little bit of res and then mana reservation efficiency. So at any point, the if you can't quite get enough reservation efficiency, ideally you would get it somewhere else, but the worst case scenario, you can always use Eventers to cover that a little bit. And in this case, because it lets us get that very important energy shield prefix on the cluster jewels, we do use it here, and it ends up saving about 150 energy shield. I think that's about all to go over on this version. And
What
then
was
we
the
could,
belt on
oh yeah,
this?
we've
It was
gone
either
for
Crusader
a
or
Stygian
Dense.
Vise.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we went for Stygian Vise just to get the socket for the Ghastly Eye Jewel. It gives you 30 move speed.
You just buy a Stygian
Good.
Vise, slam it with a Crusader Orb, and then Dense Fossil.
Right? What you're going to, just a real quick tip with that, be sure to use like an Essence of Woe or two before you slam. So roll on an uninfluenced Vise 54, T1 energy shield and then slam it because you have like a 1 in 6 chance of just immediately slamming that max energy shield. Then you don't have to go buy fossils and roll, right? But Otherwise, this is about, yeah, 30 dense fossils, I believe.
And make sure it's a prefix that's open. Your suffixes are full if you
Yes,
can.
thank you.
That. All right.
Yep. And then to go over endgame CI real quick, it's not going to be too different. Um, there aren't that many changes between the versions here. This is somewhat an amalgamation of what used to be the like high investment timeless jewel versions that have been removed, and the what used to be the next level up from budget endgame. So it's a little bit more expensive than endgame used to be. But it's kind of the all-in-one package. There aren't as many different upgrades to go for as there used to be, just because CI is a little bit more straightforward than low life is, right? Main changes, we drop oh, and one more thing I wanted to talk about here on budget endgame actually is that you have a little bit of flexibility with your sockets here. So by dropping something like cast on damage taken, rejuve totem, or even additional accuracy on your smite, sorry, in budget endgame, you can equip another Warcry here, and there's two of them that you can use. One of them is Battle Mage's Cry. This gives you and your gives your carry 2.5 base crit, which can be really good if they're lacking on that or they're using like Marlene's Fallacy or something. Another option is to use Rallying Cry, and that gives you max res. So normally we would be at 88 max res here, but if you use Rallying Cry, you have about 80% uptime on a buff that would fill in the rest of your max res here, and do so for your carry as well. So there's a
Awesome.
lot of options with the Warcries.
There's a lot
Yep.
of buttons for Aurabots.
Yeah, don't worry. Even though we lost Divine Blessing for a bit,
Dark
we found
Marionette.
ways to put more buttons in.
Say that would be the time we
Uh,
talk about the Dark Marionette
yeah. You
specter.
want to talk about it? Or
Yeah. Basically there was a specter added. Which league was it? It was 2 leagues ago. It was the one
yeah,
where
it
you
was
could,
Affliction.
yeah,
We
affliction.
found it in Wildwood.
That what happens with these specters is that when they die, they automatically resummon. Now, the problem with Guardian's Blessing is when you put it on a holy relic, which is what we used to do, it's very annoying because your holy relic is constantly dying, and then you have to keep resummoning them, recasting it. But with the Dark Marionette specters, they will automatically respawn, so you never have to resummon the minions. The worst case scenario is that all of your specters die at the same time, and then you just have to click Guardian's Blessing again, which I believe
Yep.
it's
And
instant cast, isn't it?
it is instant cast. Yeah, it's not an animation. You just have to pay attention to when and if it falls off. If and when rather, as they'll die every 8 seconds. At best. The That's one of the reasons you want to use two of them is one, it's pretty unlikely for them to, as long as one of them is alive, the blessing will remain active. So it's pretty unlikely that and by two of them, I mean summon two of the Dark Marionette Spectres and have them linked to Guardian's Blessing. It's pretty unlikely that they'll both die at the same time. And furthermore, if one of them does die, they'll get desynced, where the one of them will be at like half health, one will be at full health. The half health one will have burned down more quickly and die from the Guardian's Blessing life loss. The other one will still be alive, and so if they pretty much ever take damage, you're just gonna have them have a permanent blessing uptime, right? Whereas in hideout, without them taking damage, they do die at the same time every 8 seconds. So that is the worst case scenario with Guardian's Blessing, is that every 8 seconds you have to press an instant cast button, pretty much.
Kind of
But
like
by
what you were
using two
doing.
of them, you can mitigate most of that.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you're doing with Divine Blessing anyway. The only
Yeah, right.
downside is you kind of have to pay attention to it.
Yep. And I've got some notes in here just to,
Uh,
if you ever need to check that.
yeah, I saw you wrote the bubonic trail information there, but I still laugh every time I think about it when we were testing this in Affliction.
We
And
were
you're
so
just losing your
confused.
mind. Where did it go? Where'd the specter go? The corpse go? Because you just walk over it and then it
Yeah. It's
disappeared.
gone. We bought like 5 of them too. We're like, "Oh, it's just a bug." Went back to the hideout, tried to resummon the specter, it's gone. No, they were eaten by the boots. I think it shouldn't work that way this time, but be careful. Don't walk over your corpses with bubonic trail equipped. Okay. And then a couple other changes. I've decided to go back to Matu Tapuna here. It's very close. If you have a special use case for Redblade banner for the Warcries, or if this armor, Light of Meaning, is ludicrously expensive for some reason. You can absolutely stick a Warcry cluster back here and then go back to the Redblade banner setup. You're going to have 90 max res either way. Matu Tapuna, oh, well, maybe 89.
Depends on your timeless jewel. I think you only have
Right.
24% aura effect on that one.
Yeah. Actually, you would then take this node that we dropped, and I think that would get you back up.
There's lots of
And
ways.
then, yeah, we use Dark Seer here. This gives +2 to level all spell skill gems, which is very good since that allows you to put your purities elsewhere, right? Not just in the helmet. Um, so we just stick those in gloves, I believe. They're going to be level 23 regardless because of that Dark Seer. Also gives you a giant chunk of energy shield, which is really all you could hope to get from your weapon as an Aurabot. The downside of this is that you don't have a level 30 smite anymore, and because we're so tanky here, I decided to actually make a +4 helmet. What you do with this is you buy a helmet that is has fractured energy shield. You spam an essence of, I forget what it is. I think horror. It's one of the corrupted ones that guarantees +2 socketed aura every time. You can spam that just once if you're really on a budget, or otherwise until you get 40 intelligence on it, like a decent roll of int. And then you do suffixes cannot be changed, veiled orb, and you have about a 60% chance of unveiling +2 AoE here. You just craft energy shield and do your eldritch implicits. We use this to put our damage auras along with smite with an awakening generosity in the helmet. So all these auras are level 28 actually.
And make sure to block when you unveil on the helmet.
Yeah.
I think you want to block life, if I remember right. Life and mana are pretty much equivalent, but check on Craft of Exile.
It's either that or I want to say zombies maybe. +1 to maximum zombies. Um Anyway, yeah, check Craft of Exile Waitings to see what to block there. And then I
One thing that
think,
I was going
yeah,
to say to add on Darkseer, you mentioned the energy shield is important, but you really want to make sure that the second stat is mana, just because adding mana is a really good way to get reservation because it gives you more
right. It
mana so that
mitigates the flat
clarity,
auras,
yeah, it mitigates the flat auras a lot. So
right? Body armor, you can get a few upgrades here. This is a Awakener Orb combo, so you get an influenced base with int, influenced base with aura effect. Slam them together, fill up the suffixes, and then do suffixes cannot be changed, reforged cold. That guarantees you this bit of fizz taken as cold, and you just craft on there. I think that's going to be it. At this point, we use Forbidden Flame and Flesh to pick up Guardian here. With that, we get a crazy amount of regen and more recovery for your entire party.
so
I
this
think that's about it.
so this is
Uh,
a little bit more experimental on the Orbot.
yep,
But we know how many of you hate Coruscating Elixir, and so we're giving the people what they want. The old versions are always there. You know, the PoB link, the or GitHub
yep,
link for it has the old Orobots if you want to compare or look or still want to play Coruscating Elixir. So there's lots of information there, but maybe we'd shake it up a little bit, try something different this time.
yeah. Hope it'll be well received. It definitely. I'm looking forward to playing this in a few days in the private league.
All right,
All right.
we'll move
Well,
on to the
you want
carries.
to go over the carry changes now?
Yep, sounds good. I'm streaming my screen, right? So you
Uh, you're not sharing your screen.
let me do that real. So it's a little bit of a crangled setup we have going here. Okay, this should be good to go. All right, so we've got 4 builds to go over. The 2 main builds and then 2 new builds that I don't know. We'll probably play one of them, or maybe we'll cook something up. We haven't had time to figure out what we are actually going to play on League Start yet because we've just been making the guides and
Yeah.
the POBs this whole time. So I guess we'll figure that out with like an hour to spare before League launch. But with the removal to Hatred doing more cold damage, it is a nerf to Spark, but it doesn't really matter because the Aurabot gets Necro Aura when they didn't have it before. So you get extra cast speed that you didn't have. You get more aura effect because you have Hand of Freesia. You can use Replica Heat Shiver uh, or Malachi's Artifice. You actually go here. I'm just going to start at the early levels and we'll work our way through like we did for the Aurabot. So early on, very straightforward pathing. This is leveling with Spark. You can do Arma Crema or Rolling Magma into Firestorm. You have lots of options here, but I just kept it Spark because it's simple and you never have to change it. You just start with the skill at level 2 and then play it for the whole game, and I think that simplicity is really nice. Very straightforward pathing. But here on level 46, and if you don't have it yet, it just should be, it's like a 1C item, 1 alch item. Nobody uses it. But Malachai's Simula is a surprisingly good helmet that we've kind of overlooked for leveling spell carries. With the nerfs to the Aurabot and just things, I was kind of like revisiting the early leveling versions and trying to figure out where I can get power to try to make early progression just feel a lot better. And one of the ways we're doing that was with Malachai's Simula. This gives us a 20% chance to deal double damage with our spells, which also increases our max hit for shock, so it's even more than 20% more damage. And it also gives us blood magic, which is usually a downside, but what we can do is just run Purity of Elements on Eternal Blessing, and then we can just reserve Petrified Blood on our life because we don't have to deal with the massive 200% multiplier on Arrogance. This version actually shouldn't have Petrified Blood yet. I'll swap this for Flesh and Stone later. On the level 67 version, very similar thing. You are running Petrified Blood, Vitality with Low Life, and Pain Attunement, which also should be here. It's been a long... Believe it or not, we spent like 8 hours on the Spark PoB itself. There's a lot of changes, but it's so easy to miss small things.
Been up for a while. We actually both looked over these like 10 minutes ago, and neither of us caught that, but...
But again, just pay attention. If you have Malachai's Simula, then you run Petrified Blood, Vitality, with Purity of Elements on Eternal Blessing. If you don't, you just do the same thing you used to do, where you just reserve Purity of Elements and Petrified Blood on your mana, and then do like Flesh and Stone on your life with Arrogance. So, also added the Valico Sign, just because it's a good ring. Why not? It's pretty cheap. Lori's Lantern is really nice for defensive. For the defensive stats it gives you. It's Chaos Res, Move Speed, Ellie Res, and causes enemies damage to be unlucky, so just absolutely pick it up. For reward and Winds of Change, just good prod speed items. Then when we go to early mapping, we're using damage and cast speed specters or scepters. We used to use Annihilating Light on this version, but they made it an Uber boss drop, and so we just use it a little bit later. I don't think there were many changes here other than some pathing tree adjustments.
No longer using the staff.
No longer using the staff.
Thank God. And I've been complaining about that staff for a long time, but it was too broken. But now that it's an Uber drop, I'm starting to miss it already.
And just being able to do triple damage from
right? It's
10
so
out of 10.
simple compared to worrying about your... Well, so simple compared to doing less damage, I suppose. That's really the beginning and end of Annihilating Light. It is more damage.
So, as we get to Budget Endgame, I did remove the Magic Find versions, and you'll probably have noticed that I didn't update the Magic Find Deadeye because Magic Find's kind of dead. I have no idea how that'll play out, but it doesn't seem worth the amount of time it would take to update them in some way when we don't even know how the meta will shake out. And neither of us will be playing Trade League anyway, so yeah, we'll just have to see how that plays out and go next league. It looks like the meta will be to use a Horned Scarab of Glittering, which overrides any character quanta rarity you have. Not that you can get quanta anymore.
Right. Well, it doesn't entirely override. You can still stack rarity along with it, but
wait, can you?
It gives you a large enough value of it that you're not incentivized to have any rarity on your character unless you're like a color in a giant party, pretty
it
much.
overwrote your Magic Find stats, but that does make sense. I'll have to look into it. In any case, at the Budget Endgame setup, because we don't have an Aurabot who's running Hatred, we don't convert our damage to cold with Call of the Brotherhoods anymore. Instead, we use Replica Heat Shiver to get cold damage so that we can freeze. And this lets us use tamings, both for a huge amount of damage. You can see one taming is almost 20% more damage, but it also gives you a sizable amount of elemental resist, which makes it so that you mitigate the res penalty of Annihilating Light much easier. We also take a Lyra at this version just for 15 all res for a single passive point. We do that in the campaign, but this is why we do it in the campaign, just to mitigate Annihilating Light later. The rest of the gear is pretty straightforward, except for this. You need to get flat added fire damage somewhere. Make sure that when you hover over Spark, it says that you're doing fire damage, and that enables you to ignite, which means that you get the increased elemental damage from hits, from the taming, which, this is basically 80% more damage, or 80% increased damage, because it lets you get the ignite stat for taming.
Right. And don't run Anger on the Aurabot just to do that. The ideal place for it is pretty much on an Abyssal Jewel. Hypnotic Eye Jewel can roll that.
Yep.
Don't want to dedicate too much to proccing that when you can get it with a single affix on the passive tree there.
Another thing I added here was an Enduring Composure cluster. Again, with the flat removal of armor from Determination, we need to get a little bit more armor than we used to, so just getting 30% increased armor on the node is pretty good. But with the endurance charges being changed so that they give elemental damage reduction instead of elemental resist, basically every build should have endurance charges from somewhere. And if you don't have them, a good place to get them is Enduring Composure. You just slap it on for a few points, and there are your endurance charges. If your Aurabot is generating charges for you with Enduring Cry, then you just run a normal Jewel here. Why are words so hard? You run a normal Jewel here and just get some life on the tree or something.
Yeah, everything's hard when you've been up 20 hours at 5 a.m.
Why do we keep doing this to ourselves every time? Simulacrum, I was going to deprecate the Simulacrum version, but I had some ideas that would make it worth existing. Like the budget in-game normal setup is perfectly capable of doing Simulacrum, but I've copied it and made a few tweaks to it just to make it even better. One thing we're doing is using Breath Stealer, which these gloves are pretty good because they cause Blighted Spores to drop, which is kind of like mini Headhunter in Simulacrums because it causes enemies to create a spore, which gives random buffs, kind of like Headhunter does, in an area around. But a big portion of why we're running these now is because it allows us to allocate a passive on it, and that lets us get more skill effect duration, which for Simulacrums is just more damage because you're standing in a single spot, saturating the entire screen with sparks. We also switch over to Spark of the Nova on this version. Spark of the Nova is specifically good in Simulacrums. I don't think you want to use it generally. Not that it's bad, it's just normal Spark is slightly preferred in most general cases, in my opinion, but Spark of the Nova is definitely better for Simulacrum. Get more projectiles, get more coverage. And there were a couple other changes on the budget Simulacrum version. Can't remember what they are. I'm very tired. Added a better body armor. This has the Eldritch Implicit that Seek found. It's added in the patch notes this time. The Fizz taken as fire.
Yeah, that's going to be one of either Eater or Exarch.
We don't know
Not
which,
currently in PoB, but yeah.
but just Fizz mitigation, and that's about it. Pretty straightforward. Again, still Replica Heat Shiver. This item's pretty cheap, unless it skyrockets in price, but then more people will pick it in heist, so it'll go back down. Finally, on to the endgame version. This is where you have kind of a conundrum, and that is whether you should use Annihilating Light with Replica Heat Shiver, or if you should use Nebuluses with Heat Shiver and Call of the Brotherhoods. Now, I think it's better at this stage to use Annihilating Light, but if you have 90 max res, you can use the setup that we have in the higher investment version with just Nebs, Heat Shiver, Call of the Brotherhood. You've seen it a million times. In this version, we're still using Annihilating Light. Why is this hard? Using Tamings for res. You can anoint Lightning Resist for 6% here to get Lightning Resist and then just get Cold and Fire Resist on gear pieces. And that lets you cap your resistances even with Annihilating Light. Because the Aurabot's running Hand of Freesia, you don't have to worry about getting out of aura range, because you have to be out of... Like, links take a while to break. Like, you can blink to the other side of the map, and the link will still be there until the duration times out.
Right, you got a 4-second window there.
Yeah. So you are perfectly happy to cap your resists off the Aurabot purities now, whereas before that was a little sketchy. Anything else? We're still using Freeze Prolift because Freeze is broken. We're just getting that with Replica Heat Shiver, of course. If you can't get Replica Heat Shiver on any of these versions, you can swap one of the tamings over for Call of the Brotherhood, so you can still freeze. We're using a Light of Meaning here just to get some evasion rating. You can do evasion rating, armor, and
Yeah,
shield.
armor would be preferred, but the idea here is that one of the evasion or energy shield ones are going to be pretty much dirt cheap, presumably. So
And it's just worth doing.
just a little bit of value out there.
All right, and on to the high investment in game. Very little changed on this version of the build. There were a couple tweaks. I don't remember what they are because it's been a while, but it's basically the same. You using Nebs. You have a 90 max res very easily. You use Annihilating's approach for adrenaline. Very simple. Not much change on this version. All right. Anything else to add in the Spark Carry before we move on?
Don't believe so. I think that covers it.
I am way too tired, dude. We're
Yeah.
struggling over here. All right, on to the Stormbrand carry. I updated this version as well. Some things changed. I kind of cleaned up the leveling tree, swapped some things around, made a lot of general improvements, put Malachi Simula on this version, um, cleaned up a couple points. So, like, we made the Stormbrand guide to play it. And then after I played it, I had some thoughts on how I want to improve things, make leveling smoother. So I just added those here. You don't really need to worry about it much. Just some leveling improvements, some optimizations on the tree, some gear swaps. Something to mention is you want to get. I put Impulse's Broken Heart on the Crit Stormbrand swap setup. Even though this is a unique body armor, playing Stormbrand without Impulsa plus Storm's Gift is very painful. Don't do it. Get the Explode, and that way you can feel very good while you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a whole different skill, really, with Impulsa. You kill one enemy, an entire pack is dead. That allows you to focus a lot more on the single target, which is what feels good with a brand.
And then Budget Endgame, we're doing the same thing as the Budget Endgame on the Spark Carry, using Replica Heat Shiver with Tamings to help Annihilating Light res. Um, Basically, everything that I said there still applies. I don't think there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, similar setup. This
Made some,
version changed to the least for sure.
yeah, made some changes, but they're mostly just small optimizations. Endgame setup generally stayed the same. Again, made some pathing changes, made some item adjustments. We are using, I just want to mention this because people often don't understand why we're running Explode here. By using a Explode body armor, it's just better than Impulsa, and it lets us also get like Frenzy Charge generation.
Yeah.
And so we use gloves to convert that lightning damage or that physical damage to lightning, and we use this mastery here just for the Explode. And then, they lightning damage gets converted to cold, the Explodes benefit from all the nebula scaling. So I also have Progenesis, Bottled Faith, and Oriath's End on this. I'm not going to remove them. You can use these flasks on everything. They're just broken. If you don't have the currency for them, just don't use them. You are
Yeah.
so tanky. You don't need 56k max hit, um, or a 300k max hit
Right.
elemental. Just don't run them. But
Yeah. Like as an example, there's a spot on the left of the tree where you can change a single jewel socket with a light of meaning to get like 30,000 armor. We were thinking about that, and then it's like you're just not gonna die. You might as well get 8% damage there, or
yeah,
6%, however much it is.
and this
Um,
build, yeah, it's so defensive. This is
yeah,
probably my favorite feeling carry build that I've ever played. I really enjoyed it just because you run around, stuff explodes, feels fantastic. Brands are very fun. Anything to add on the Stormbrand carry? Oh, one thing I want to mention. I had on the budget. And
don't think so. As far as the flasks, real quick, I would emphasize without using Impulsa, I think the Aureus End is a little bit less replaceable than everything else because of how it interacts with Call of the Brotherhood Nebula scaling. It's usually on the cheaper end though, so
yeah, again, not necessary, but just one of those things you can add.
right.
Penance of Dissipation.
Genesis and the other specifically are ones that you might want to worry about after you've already got the Aurabot like geared to the teeth, pretty much.
Uh, yeah, one last thing to add, Penance of Dissipation. If you want to do only a single target, you can do that with this character. You just use this 6 link instead of this one. Make sure not to use Swiftbrand on Penance of Dissipation. That's kind of bad. And if you're doing Penance of Dissipation, you want to get some duration somewhere. You may consider pathing up to Brand Equity and anointing duration, but it's very little
Yep.
changes outside of that if you want Penance of
You could also use an Impossible Escape if they're cheap for Magebane or Necromantic Aegis to yoink the duration that way.
And then another thing to mention, you don't need to use Penance Brand of Dissipation for bossing. Stormbrand will melt them just fine. It's just if you want to push it and you're only doing uber bosses, then you might as well, right? It's just a arguably
Yep.
better skill for it. Okay, that's it for the main builds. I want to mention the Mana Guardian Cursebot is not being updated. Very little would change, almost nothing would change actually, so if you want to play it, you still can, but Snap's Warcry champion support is just better as a third party member than the Mana Guardian was, the Mana Guardian Cursebot was before, and it adds some curses as well, so just play that. It's a really cool build. I highly recommend it. If you haven't watched this video, you should. There'll be a link to it in the description. So that's not being updated either. Now we have the two kind of experimental fun things. First, I'm going to start with it because I love it so much. Consecrated Path of Endurance Slayer Carry. And I want to show you one thing, right? And that's this. This is the Consecrated Path of Endurance radius. Like, you just hit the entire screen, and it jumps to enemies kind of like a mini flicker strike, and you're doing it several times a second, and you have 209% move speed, and your defenses are absolutely unholy, and it makes your Aurabot a lot tankier because you give your Aurabot 8 max endurance charges. This is just, I don't know, might be playing like the other build, the Kinetic Blast Deadeye, just to map to generate uniques for people. There's
Yeah.
not a leveling tree on this setup because just didn't have time, and I don't know, you can figure it out yourself or just spec into it with time. One other thing to note about this version is it is using an Aurabot with Tripanon. A lot of times for attack skills, you reach a point where you would rather the Aurabot run a Soul Link just for extra defense and, being able to use a shield and weapon. But on this build, I think your Aurabot should always run Tripanon and never swap. Getting crit is very difficult, and it's just a massive more damage multiplier. And your defenses are insane. You don't need Soul Link. You make the Aurabot more tanky by giving them endurance charges.
Yep. And you're gonna want to be occasionally using Enduring Cry as you or as you consecrate a path around to try and give your Aurabot a little bit of endurance charges there, since unless they're using Elixir of the Unbroken Circle or something similar, they won't be able to actually Warcry, since they're going to be trying to keep up with you teleporting around everywhere while they're wielding a Tripanon.
Like, trying to get endurance charges in the Aurabot, like maybe use Enduring Composure on an Aurabot at that point. Like, there's a lot of ways you can do it. Just make sure your Aurabot is getting and maintaining endurance charge stacks.
Right.
So, Consecrated Path of Endurance, it spends an endurance charge every time you cast it. And we cast it or attack 3 something times per second. And so that means we need to generate lots of endurance charges. And for that, we just use endurance charge on melee stun. Because it turns out when you hit an enemy for 20 million damage on your average hit, which is actually better, because I'm in Sand Stance because I like an AoE number being bigger. You switch to Blood Stance, now you're close to 25 million. On a hit, you just are going to stun them, and this should be more than enough to sustain endurance charges and be teleporting around at will. If for whatever reason endurance charges are a problem, say for Uber bosses, don't quite know how this will work, haven't had time to test it, but worst case scenario is for bossing, you just use normal consecrated path and you just lose a little bit of damage, a small amount, but it's
Yep.
completely fine. There's no real.
Depending, if you actually can tattoo enough Warcry CDR, those go over strength nodes on the tree, you can get to a point where you can have about like 90% uptime simply by pressing Enduring Cry. Uptime on Consecrated Path of Endurance, that is.
But yeah, this is a really cool build. I like it a lot. People wanted to know what I would play as a melee carry for Melee League. This is it. You just blink around, big AoE, big damage, big defense, kind of just has everything. All right, and the last build, the one we'll probably be playing, is Kinetic Blast Deadeye as just a mapping character. This character is meant to do one thing, and that is go fast and clear maps very quickly. And for that end, we have we have 320% move speed, so we are zooming.
Yep.
And
If you're an Aurabot, you want to be sure to use the Link Mastery for this one, the move speed. Otherwise, you are never going to be able to keep up. So be sure to fit that in.
so we take a lot of move speed, and use items like Queen of the Forest, Death Rush, to get even more move speed. We use Fledgling, the change on Deadeye's Far Shot node that made it 0 to or up to 30% more damage instead of Far Shot, which gave you up to 60% more damage at far range. This is actually kind of a buff because we just use Fledgling now, and so we get both.
On top of 40% prog speed feels really good.
And so this is just how we would play, or probably will play, Kinetic Blast Deadeye. There are some things to consider with this build. This version is not using Trypanon. If you have Trypanon on your Aurabot, which for early progression is probably going to be better, you just use Merlian's Fallacy. But later on, you can get enough crit on a wand, 10, 11% base crit pretty easily. And so you just scale crit that way, and you can do better things with the Aurabot. Zeal's
Right. If the
Amplifier,
Aurabot is war crying, they can also supplement with Battle Mage's Cry for 2.5 base crit.
yeah, which does help.
Something to consider. Yeah.
Zeal's Amplifier, we just run this for AoE. That's basically it. Kinetic Blast really likes AoE on the explosions, and it's really hard to get that. Um, for our skill gems, we have a 6-link Barrage and a 6-link Kinetic Blast. And if you're doing mapping, you'll run Kinetic Blast on the 6-link. If you're trying to do bosses, you'll run Barrage on the 6-link. And that's basically it. It's the eternal problem that Wanders have. You have your clear skill
Yep.
and your boss skill, and you can't run 6-links on both. So probably just going to run Kinetic Blast, because this should be more than enough to clear everything while you're mapping.
Right. Especially in T17 maps, because they're so close together, there's a lot of walls around. Those are going to be multiplying your KB damage by multiple times. It really excels in that type of environment, so can kind of use that as a strength.
It's very nice. Uh, there's at one point Kinetic Blast had 13 or 14 support gems here, just because I wanted to add things that were options, but maybe that's too confusing. So
Yeah.
if you can get Awakened Fork, run Awakened Fork and drop this node here. That's just in Trade League, you'll be able to do that. We probably won't get it until a few days in a private league, if that. And so, no Awakened Fork for us. So another thing, returning projectiles. If you have Nimbus, you just drop returning projectiles. Nimbus is really good, at crazy item. To the surprise of no one, you make that swap. I don't think it's worth running GMP here, although you can. Instead, you want to just run a Dying Sun, which should be here. But again, we will have a hard time dropping it in a private league, so just extra projectiles while mapping. And what else? Awakened increased area damage support is actually really good. You get Awakened. Am I just losing my mind? Awakened increased area.
It's at the bottom. Yeah.
So you get 50% AoE, which is really nice, and 14% more area damage, which counts for your explosions. So it's really good. AoE is, if you ever have done a 5-way carry and you've noticed that you've seen what's going on, those builds work by stacking AoE on Kinetic Blast to the absolute moon. So that should tell you how important AoE is. It's just really hard to get. So those are your options. And that's about it. I don't think there's a lot to go over on this. We'll be playing this at some point because we want to map. We don't play the Consecrated Path of
Yeah.
Endurance once we figure out what we're doing. Yeah, that's about it. I don't think there's anything else. I think we've covered it all.
Yep. Nothing to add here.
Yep, thank you guys for watching. Thanks for hanging in here. We are a little bit cooked in the head right now, so hopefully it wasn't too bad.
A little bit delirious, if you will.
I will be streaming on League Start. I'm really excited to stream every day. I know we say that every time and then stop after a day, as it tends to go, but actually going to do it this time because it's been very fun streaming the last couple days. So, all right, I'm very excited for this next league. It just looks insane. Again, join us on EOE if you want to play a private league. Anything else you want to add, Seek?
I think
Oh,
that's it.
last thing, Atlas farming strats. Just go watch Snap's video on it.
Yep. Absolutely. That is something we had zero time to consider, and can't go wrong with what Snap is put out there.
All right, catch you guys later. Thank you for watching.